I am Adrian. And what do you do when the man who raised you, the titan of industry, the pillar of the community, turns out to be nothing more than a cheap liar wrapped in an Armani suit? Do you simply mourn your mother's tragic death, or do you start asking the questions that tear apart the foundation of everything you've ever known? Was it really an accident? Or was the wreck that killed my mother simply the catastrophic final act in a betrayal that began in the velvet shadows of our own home? Hold those questions. They are heavy, I know. But before we step across the threshold into this darkness, remember one thing. Secrets only stay secrets until someone decides to speak. If you're looking for the truth behind the polished veneer of old money and scandalous family drama, then you've found the right place. Don't forget to make yourself part of the inner circle. Subscribe to Behind Closed Doors and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single chapter of how the Queen of the North End finally got her justice. It has been 1 year since the funeral, and the silence in this house is louder than any grief. My mother, Maria, was the sun. She wasn't just a wealthy woman. She was a light source. Her laugh was a genuine, full-bodied thing that could shake the dust out of the most depressing corner of our estate. Then, a black ice patch on a foggy highway. That's what the police report said. That's what the world believed. I believed it too at first. Grief is a thick fog, the kind that wraps around your head and makes you grateful for any simple explanation. It makes you a captive of the narrative. And I was a good little prisoner. But then, 6 months later, Dad got married again. 6 months. The ink was barely dry on Mom's death certificate, and there he was, standing at the altar of the very church where my parents exchanged vows, marrying Sonia. Sonia, a name that always felt like the metallic aftertaste of a lie. She was his old flame, the one who lingered on the periphery of our lives like a perfectly dressed vulture. My father, Victor Thorne, always said she was a dear friend of the family. But I always saw the way her eyes tracked him across a room, a slow, possessive scan, like she was taking inventory of something she already owned. "It's what your mother would have wanted, Adrian," Victor had the audacity to say, adjusting the cufflink Mom gave him on their 25th anniversary. His voice was a flat, low monotone, the voice of a man reading a business contract, not explaining the obliteration of his family's memory. I remember staring at him across the mahogany expanse of the dining room table that night. The room felt like a stage set, too perfect, too cold. "Really, Dad?" My voice was tight, a thin wire threatening to snap. "Mom would have wanted you to replace her before the leaves turned brown twice, because the only thing I saw Mom want was for you to put down that damned phone and actually see her." Victor didn't flinch. He never flinched. He had the emotional range of a very expensive statue. "That is an emotional and frankly childish interpretation, Adrian. Sonia brings stability. She understands the demands of running a corporation." Sonia, already presiding at the table, her hand resting on the back of Victor's chair like a security clasp, chimed in. Her smile never reached her eyes. It only polished her teeth. "Your father has been so incredibly resilient, Adrian. Some people, like your mother, bless her heart, simply don't have the temperament for the Thorne legacy." That's when the first crack appeared in the prisoner's narrative. Temperament? My mother was a steel magnolia. She ran 3 charities and managed the entire domestic side of Victor's empire without breaking a sweat. If she lacked temperament, it was only the temperament for Victor's cold indifference. Sonia's words were a carefully weighted stone, meant to sink any further inquiry into the depths of Mom's reputation. I got up. The sound of my chair scraping back felt like a gunshot in that mausoleum of a room. Don't speak about my mother as if she was a minor inconvenience you finally cleared off the books, Sonia. Victor simply watched me. His silence was the power he wielded. It was a suffocating blanket woven from disappointment and authority. He didn't need to yell. His lack of reaction was the loudest indictment. Adrian, he sighed, reaching for his single malt. Control your dramatics. You inherited too much of your mother's sensitivity. It won't serve you in business. Now, sit down. We need to discuss the restructuring of the estate trust. The restructuring was, of course, a thinly veiled mechanism to give Sonia more control. They were a unified front, two perfectly matched components of a sinister machine, and I was the irritating, ill-fitting cog they planned to jettison. I saw my future then, stark and cold, an exile, the emotionally unstable son relegated to the sidelines while they carved up Mom's life like a holiday roast. My grief wasn't allowed. It was an impedance to their acquisition. I remember walking out of that house and standing on the manicured lawn. The perfect geometry of the hedges, the blinding whiteness of the granite facade, it all looked like a beautifully wrapped package containing something rotten and decayed. It hit me then, a physical blow to the chest, sharp as a shard of glass. The real tragedy wasn't the accident. The real tragedy was that my father hadn't grieved because there was nothing to grieve. He had simply removed an obstacle. My mother wasn't just dead. She had been erased. And I, Adrian, was left alone with a grief that felt suddenly, shockingly, like an insult. I had to know. The question was no longer why she died, but what had she found out that made her death so convenient for the two people now sleeping in her bed? It was a promise I made to her in that quiet, cold night, a vow whispered to the shadows. I would find the truth, even if it meant tearing the entire Thorne empire down around Victor's ears. My purpose had crystallized, hard and sharp, like diamond under pressure. I was no longer Adrian, the grieving son. I was Adrian, the sentinel of Maria's memory, and the hunt had just begun. The hunt began not with a detective agency or a whispered phone call, but with a piece of heavy cream cardstock slipped beneath my door, an envelope smelling faintly of old leather and dust. The world has a peculiar way of delivering dynamite wrapped in silk, and this was it. It was a formal summons from the firm of Sterling and Graves, attorneys at law, requesting my presence regarding the estate of a Mr. Elias Vance. I had never heard the name. Elias Vance. It felt like an anchor dropped out of nowhere into the turbulent waters of my life. I walked into the law offices not expecting much, maybe some distant relative of Mom's I'd forgotten, leaving me a chipped teacup. The office was quiet, smelling of beeswax and history, the opposite of my father's glass and steel monolith. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Graves himself, was older, with soft eyes and the kind of quiet authority that makes you believe every word he says is important. He didn't offer a handshake, just a somber nod that felt less like a greeting and more like an acknowledgement of shared burden. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice gravelly, "thank you for coming. Mr. Vance passed away 6 weeks ago. In his will, he stipulated that you, and you alone, should receive his most prized possession. This." He pushed a small velvet-lined wooden box across the mahogany desk. It was heavy, and when I lifted the lid, a beam of afternoon sun caught the object inside. It was a pocket watch, a magnificent antique Swiss timepiece. The gold casing was dull with age, intricately chased with scroll work that looked like frozen lace. It was the kind of object that didn't just tell time, it measured history. "It's beautiful," I managed. the sudden weight of the gift feeling strange in my palm. $50,000 easily, I thought, the investor reflex kicking in. But why me? Why the son of a stranger? Mr. Graves leaned forward, and the quiet in the room deepened. This was where the silk wrap came off, revealing the dynamite. Mr. Vance was a private man, Adrian. He never met you, but he knew your mother. Intimately, in a way. My stomach tightened, the first stab of jealousy and suspicion. Had Mom been keeping secrets of her own? Was this the final, cruel twist? Mr. Graves read my panic and held up a calming hand. Not in the way you're thinking. When your mother, Maria, was involved in that tragic accident a year ago, she was an organ donor. Mr. Vance, he was the recipient of her heart. The world tilted. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a horrifying, magnificent, impossible truth. I looked down at the watch in my hand, and it felt suddenly alive, a warm, rhythmic thing. The reality landed like a physical blow. The man who had died was carrying a piece of my mother, a piece that had literally continued to beat, living out the final year of its existence inside a stranger's chest. He had her heart? I whispered. The power of silence was deafening, only broken by the faint, steady ticking of the watch. Yes, and he spent that extra year, that precious gift of time your mother gave him, watching you, watching your father. He saw things, Adrian, things that the heart sees, perhaps. Graves paused, allowing the gravity to settle. He knew Maria had been deeply troubled before the accident. He heard her stories in a way. His gratitude wasn't just for his life. It was for the opportunity to act on something Maria had been powerless to change. He motioned toward the watch. The watch is the key, Adrian. The true inheritance is not the gold. My fingers, guided by some instinct, traced the back casing. It was heavy, thicker than it should be. With a metallic click that sounded too loud, I found the almost invisible hinge and popped the back open. It wasn't just a cover, it was a tiny, secondary door. Inside, nestled beneath the main mechanism, was a piece of perfectly folded rice paper, thin as a ghost's wing. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a love letter or a final confession from Vance. It was precise, technical, and utterly chilling. Scribbled in the tight, careful script of a meticulous man were two things: a URL, https, nexus.cloud, ledger, Thornwell, a single complex alphanumeric code, MARIALIVES726. What is this? My voice was ragged, catching in my throat. The key to what your mother saw, Mr. Graves stated plainly, his eyes full of sympathy and a challenge. Mr. Vance was a retired forensic accountant. He spent his final year documenting everything Maria told him she suspected about Victor's company, the offshore accounts, the contract shell companies, and the money laundering. But more importantly, he documented the human cost, the sheer audacity of it, the cold, brilliant revenge. A dead man, powered by my mother's heart, had constructed the perfect trap for my father. Victor and Sonia, consumed by their immediate greed, had missed the most important event of the last year, the steady, determined beat of justice preparing its strike. I pocketed the watch, the heavy gold cold against my hand. It was no longer a gift. It was a loaded weapon. The grief was gone, replaced by a scalding, focused rage, sharp as a surgeon's knife. The accident now had a name: betrayal. And that betrayal had a cost. Tell me everything about Elias Vance's methods, I told Mr. Graves, my voice now low, steady, and utterly devoid of the sensitivity my father had mocked. It's time to open that cloud drive. It's time for the son of Maria to inherit what's truly owed. The game was no longer about mourning. It was about reckoning. The moment I typed the final digit of the code, MARIALIVES 726 into the online ledger, my life bifurcated. There was the life I had lived, wrapped in the comforting lie of a wealthy, if dysfunctional, family. And then there was this new life, cold and sharp, built on the bedrock of my father's calculated cruelty. The cloud drive was a fortress of truth. Vance hadn't just suspected things. He had cataloged them with the grim precision of an anatomist. Hundreds of folders, dummy corporations in the Caymans, shell companies routed through Panama, and a staggering $40 million siphoned from Thorne Enterprises over a 5-year period. It was all there, a meticulous roadmap of theft. But the real gut punch wasn't the spreadsheets. It was the personal notes file, compiled by Vance from fragments of Mom's frantic final emails to a sympathetic friend, emails that Vance had somehow intercepted or received. Maria hadn't just discovered the fraud. She had discovered the affair. Victor wasn't just stealing money. He was funding Sonia's extravagant lifestyle, using company funds to buy her jewelry and real estate, presents Mom thought were for her. The emails detailed the final screaming argument. Victor had threatened to ruin her, to frame her for the embezzlement if she dared to expose him. Keep your mouth shut, Maria, or you'll lose everything. Including Adrian. I'll make sure the world knows you're just an emotionally unstable woman. That was the pressure cooker. That was the moral terrorism that sent my mother driving into the night, her mind a frantic, broken place. It wasn't black ice. It was Victor's cold, deliberate hand pushing her over the edge. My grief instantly transformed from a dull ache into a searing, white-hot resolve. I wasn't seeking solace. I was seeking complete annihilation. I knew I couldn't go to the police yet. Victor was too well connected. He'd spin the ledger as a forgery, claim Vance was a disgruntled former business rival, and bury me in legal maneuvering. I needed more than paper. I needed operational evidence. I needed to see Victor and Sonia make one more fatal mistake. My first calculated move was to enlist Mr. Graves, Vance's lawyer. Graves was a man of old-school integrity, horrified by the contents of the ledger. "I can't directly help you with corporate espionage, Adrian," he warned me, his face etched with worry. "But I can put you in touch with a retired colleague, Frank Maxwell. Frank specializes in this particular shade of corporate crime. He's the ghost in the machine." Frank Maxwell was everything my father was not. Rumpled, cheap suit, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He didn't ask if Victor was guilty. He only asked, "How deep do you want the shovel to go?" "To the foundation," I told him. "I want to watch it all crumble." Frank nodded slowly. "Good. You're not doing this for the money, Adrian. You're doing it for the moral calculus. That's a powerful fuel." But the real pivot, the thing that anchored my resolve, came from an unexpected source. I reached out to the Vance family. I had to see the faces of the people who now held my mother's heart. I drove upstate to a small, unassuming house. Mrs. Vance Eleanor greeted me with a hesitant, tearful embrace. "Adrian, you sound exactly like Elias described you." Their daughter, Chloe, was maybe 25, studying nursing. She had her father's kind eyes. Sitting there, in their modest living room, drinking the terrible coffee Mrs. Vance insisted on making, I felt a connection deeper than blood. It was a connection born of flesh and gratitude. "Elias knew the heart was Maria's," Eleanor confided, her voice soft. "He said he suddenly had this need for justice, a furious, driving need to organize his life and clear the debts of others. He knew Maria needed help." That heart, it gave him the focus to finish his work. Chloe spoke up then, her voice surprisingly firm. "Dad told me, Adrian. He knew he only had a little time. He had to make sure that extra year was meaningful. He felt it wasn't just about the money, it was about your mother's honor. That conversation was the anointing. It stripped away the last of my self-pity and shame. I wasn't just a vengeful son. I was the agent of two people, my mother and the stranger who carried her spirit. The heart had lived long enough to gather the truth. Now, the son had to deliver the blow. I returned to the Thorne offices the next day, not as Adrian the grief-stricken heir, but as Adrian the spy. My father, in his typical dismissive style, had relegated me to a non-essential, special projects role, a glorified pencil pusher far from the finance room. But that was their mistake. They saw weakness. They saw a pawn. They had no idea they had just allowed the Queen of Hearts back onto the chessboard. I had a purpose now, a cold, elegant plan. The surveillance had begun, and every move I made would be dictated by the man who carried my mother's last, beating hope for justice. Returning to Thorne Enterprises felt like walking into a glittering morgue. Everything was expensive, polished, and dead at its core. I played the part Victor and Sonia expected, the emotionally fragile son, incapable of challenging their power. Victor had installed me in an office so far removed from the executive floor, it might as well have been in another time zone. "You need time to find your footing, Adrian," he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Start by reviewing the old construction contracts. Basic oversight. Simple work." Simple work was exactly what I needed. It was the perfect cloak. My assigned role in special projects gave me access to decades of archived data, the dusty, forgotten corners of the company network where nobody ever looked. Using the details Frank Maxwell helped extract from Vance's detailed ledger, dates, specific amounts, and the names of 4 key shell companies, I began my search. It was a digital treasure hunt. Only the treasure was evidence of my father's ruin. The ledger was a Rosetta Stone. It named a specific dummy corporation, Ouroboros Holdings, the main conduit for Victor's offshore siphoning. I cross-referenced Ouroboros against old contracts, and there it was, a $15 million construction project from 3 years ago, flagged internally as a cost overrun. The files showed a $5 million payment to Ouroboros for specialized consultation that never actually took place. I downloaded everything, backing up the files onto a secure, encrypted drive Frank had provided. Every piece of evidence was a nail in Victor's coffin. The tension in the office was a palpable, oily thing. Victor and Sonia operated in the open, confident in their invincibility. They were too busy planning their next big score to notice the mouse in the walls. That next score was the proposed merger with an Asian investment group, a deal Victor was pushing through with terrifying speed, a final, massive payout before he planned to semi-retire. Sonia, now the de facto CFO, was the driving force, her ambition a sharp, metallic tang in the air. One Tuesday, Victor called a rare family dinner at the estate. It wasn't about bonding. It was about humiliation. "Adrian," Sonia began, swirling a glass of our best Cabernet, her eyes cold as chips of ice. "How are the old contracts? Are they fascinating?" I kept my gaze low, mastering the art of the wounded puppy. "They're detailed, Sonia, a lot of paper." Victor laughed, a short, dry, mirthless cough. "He's struggling to find the margins, darling. He's too busy trying to find the feelings in the balance sheets. That's the problem with his generation, Adrian. You're all drowning in sentiment. This company needs strength, not sentimentality." He then pivoted to Sonia, his tone shifting to genuine respect. "Sonia, I want you to head up the final negotiations for the Pacific deal. You have the killer instinct I need." Sonia leaned back, basking in the praise, throwing me a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Frankly, Adrian," she drawled, her voice loud enough for the housekeeper to hear. "You are simply too soft. You are the shadow of your mother. All heart, no spine. You could never run this company." The emotional side of the business, the people side, was what led to Maria's instability. And that instability, as we all know, led to the crash. The words were a physical strike. Instability. She said it as if it were a contagious disease. My jaw locked so hard I thought my teeth would shatter. My internal monologue was a scream. "You engineered that instability, you vile snake. You pushed her to the edge." But I remained seated, a pillar of feigned compliance. I took a slow sip of water, a trick Frank taught me, a small, physical action to halt the emotional explosion. "You might be right, Sonia," I said, my voice barely above a murmur. "Maybe I'm too emotionally invested in honesty to run a company like this." Victor just rolled his eyes, dismissing my comment as another harmless, philosophical sigh from his weak son. He completely missed the hidden blade in the statement. Their arrogance was a canyon, and I was using it as my hiding place. That night, after they retired, I crept back to the home office. I had a theory, based on Vance's notes, that Victor kept a single, physical insurance file, a list of his most confidential contacts, hidden somewhere obvious. My eyes went straight to the antique Swiss globe in the library, a massive, ornate thing Victor loved to spin. It wasn't inside the globe, but beneath it. Taped to the bottom of the mahogany base was a small sealed envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper listing 4 names, 4 encrypted email addresses, and the password for the emergency safety deposit box. The key was the password, Maria's Rose. The tenderness of the password hit me with unexpected force. He used my mother's favorite flower, her private pet name, as the key to his darkest secrets. He had commercialized even his affection. It was a perfect encapsulation of his evil. He could only value emotion if it served his practical needs. I photographed the paper, taped the envelope back, and replaced the globe. The final piece was in place. The confrontation wasn't going to be about spreadsheets. It was going to be about a heart and a rose, and the complete, utter moral vacuum of Victor Thorne. The trap was set. Now, I just needed the perfect stage for the kill. The date of the board meeting for the Pacific merger was 3 days away. The climax was coming. The atmosphere in the Thorne Enterprises boardroom was toxic, thick with the scent of expensive cologne, old ambition, and raw panic. It was the day of the merger vote. Victor, flanked by a smug Sonia, sat at the head of the long obsidian table, radiating an oily confidence. The board members, a collection of tired, wealthy men who valued stability above all else, were ready to rubber stamp the Pacific deal, secure in the promise of their next dividend. I sat at the far end, an intentional exile, silent as a gargoyle. "Gentlemen," Victor began, his voice smooth as poured oil. "This merger with Kai Group is the future. It solidifies our offshore positioning and guarantees a 20% growth projection. Sonia, if you would walk us through the final liquidity reports." Sonia, dressed in a sharp, unforgiving red suit, began projecting numbers onto the enormous screen. They were dazzling, inflated, false, but meticulously presented. She spoke of growth, of expansion, of the new era of Thorne Enterprises, subtly painting Maria's era as weak and sentimental. My heart was beating a furious rhythm against my ribs, or perhaps it was Maria's heart, beating through Elias Vance, guiding my hand. I waited until Sonia reached the exact moment of the final approval slide, the moment the pens were hovering over the dotted line. Then I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply spoke into the cold, calculated silence. "Before you sign, gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a shard of glass, I think you deserve to understand the true liquidity report, the report that details where the other $40 million went. All heads snapped toward me. Victor's smile vanished, replaced by a momentary flash of pure, murderous alarm, quickly masked by controlled rage. Sonia's perfect composure cracked, her eyes widening like a startled bird's. "Adrian, sit down!" Victor thundered, slamming his hand on the table. "This is not the time for your emotional outbursts. This is a private corporate matter." "It stopped being a private matter," I countered, walking slowly toward the central projector controls. "The moment your personal greed destroyed the woman who built the true integrity of this company." I ignored Victor's furious sputter and took the remote from Sonia's trembling hand. The screen, which moments ago showed soaring profit margins, suddenly showed the meticulous, shocking reality. A detailed ledger entry titled Ouroboros Holdings, Unauthorized Divergence. "This gentleman," I announced, my voice gaining strength, "is an exact replica of a forensic audit compiled by Mr. Elias Vance. It documents how Victor Thorne and Sonia Martinez, not Thorne, have been systematically embezzling company funds through 4 shell corporations, funneling the money directly into personal offshore accounts." I flipped the slide, displaying the damning evidence, the financial paper trail, complete with the bank codes and dates, exactly as Vance had laid it out. A collective gasp rippled around the table. The board members, sharks who only respected power and stability, looked nauseated. This wasn't just theft, it was scandal. Victor stood up, his face purple with fury, utterly losing his mask of control. "This is slander. This man, Vance, is a disgruntled phantom. Adrian is mentally disturbed. He's still mourning. This document is a forgery, a son betraying his father." I looked directly at him, meeting his eyes for the first time in years without flinching. "No, Dad. This is justice, and it was signed by a man with Mom's heart." I flipped to the final critical slide. It wasn't financial. It was the personal notes file, the fragments of Maria's emails, detailing Victor's infidelity with Sonia and his threat to ruin Maria's reputation and take me away from her. The words, projected 10 feet high, were horrifyingly intimate. "He told me to keep quiet. Said he'd call me unstable. I can't breathe. Friend's name." The room fell into an abyss of silence. Sonia sank back into her chair, her face ash white, knowing her carefully constructed facade had been demolished. The board wasn't just looking at theft now. They were looking at moral turpitude, at emotional abuse, at a betrayal so profound it led directly to my mother's death. I finished not with a legal argument, but a eulogy. I pulled the gold pocket watch from my vest, its ticking suddenly loud and persistent. Mr. Vance was the recipient of my mother's heart. He was given 1 year of life, powered by her last strong beat. In that year, he didn't rest. He didn't just thank the donor family. He spent every borrowed minute collecting the truth that my mother died trying to protect. I held the watch up, letting the gold catch the light. "This is not my evidence, Victor. This is Maria's integrity, finally speaking from the grave. Her heart lived long enough to ensure your collapse." The reaction was swift and brutal. The chairman of the board, a man named Mr. Finch, slammed his hand down, this time in fury directed at Victor. "Victor, you are suspended pending immediate criminal and civil investigation. Get out of here, both of you, now." Victor Thorne, the Titan, the untouchable mogul, was escorted out of his own boardroom by 2 security guards, his face a mask of ruined pride and disbelief. Sonia followed, her red suit suddenly looking like a clown's costume. The climax was over. The game was won. But the true resolution, the healing, had yet to begin. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. a financial earthquake followed by a media tsunami. Victor and Sonia's swift, humiliating exit from the boardroom was only the beginning. Within 24 hours, the financial news was flooded with the scandal, embezzlement, corporate fraud, and the dark whispers of a suspicious death linked to the company's downfall. Victor Thorne, once the untouchable pillar, was now facing criminal charges and massive civil suits aimed at clawing back the stolen millions. Sonia, stripped of her spurious title and her stolen lifestyle, vanished from the public eye, isolated, disgraced, and facing her own legal reckoning. They were two figures reduced to dust, the architects of their own moral ruin. I watched the news reports with a strange, detached calm. There was no joy in the destruction, only a profound sense of completion. The vengeance was a sterile, necessary process, like draining an infection. But my purpose had never been simply to destroy Victor. It was to save Maria's legacy. The first few weeks were a blur of emergency meetings. As the temporary CEO, I acted fast, working with the remaining honest board members and Frank Maxwell. The goal was triage, shut down the fraudulent deals, cooperate fully with the authorities, and, most importantly, redefine the moral compass of Thorne Enterprises. My mother's true passion had always been philanthropy, particularly in providing psychological support for victims of domestic coercion, the exact kind of slow, insidious abuse Victor had inflicted on her. Using the money that was successfully recovered from the Ouroboros shell accounts, a poetic twist of fate, the very money Victor had stolen, I established the Maria Thorne Foundation. It wasn't just a tax write-off, it was the company's new heart. I diverted a significant portion of future profits into it, dedicating the enterprise not just to building structures, but to rebuilding lives. "That's a bold move, Adrian," the chairman, Mr. Finch, told me during one late-night strategy session. "You're betting the company's future on empathy." "No," I corrected him, looking out at the city lights. "I'm betting it on integrity. It's what my mother died defending, and it's the only thing that will keep this company alive." The most significant change, however, was personal. I kept in close contact with the Vance family. They had been the silent partners in my act of justice, a constant reminder that my actions were motivated by something larger than blood. I visited Eleanor and Chloe often, sometimes just sitting and talking about Maria, sharing stories of a woman neither of them had ever met in life, yet knew intimately through the steady beat of her heart. One afternoon, sitting with Chloe, she reached out and gently squeezed my hand. "Adrian," she said softly, "Dad always told me that every beat he felt was a reminder to live truthfully. He passed the truth to you, and you used it to create something good. You didn't just get revenge, you inherited his mission." It was then I understood. Family isn't defined by shared DNA or a last name. It is defined by shared values and the courage to act on them. My true family wasn't the cold, calculating dynasty built by Victor. It was this fragile, resilient connection forged by a heart that refused to be silenced. I kept the gold pocket watch on my desk. Every time I looked at its intricate, perfect mechanics, I heard the faint, constant tick. It wasn't a reminder of a stranger's death, or even my mother's tragedy. It was the rhythm of a life redeemed, a promise kept, and a moral compass set firmly to true north. The journey of vengeance was over, replaced by the lifelong work of legacy. I hadn't just brought down a tyrant. I had used the wreckage to build a monument to kindness, proving that even from the depths of betrayal, something honest and strong can emerge. The heart of Maria Thorne, through the body of Elias Vance and the hands of her son, had finally found its peace, and in doing so, had healed mine. If this story resonated with you, If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the quiet force of unexpected strength, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. What defines true justice for you? Your connection to these stories and this community is what keeps the truth alive. Let us know in the comments.